Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron. Stanzas 1 to 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Antipodean Writer at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron. Stanzas 1 to 11. Stanza 1. Many a vanished year and age, and tempest's breath and battle's rage have swept over Corinth, yet she stands, a fortress formed to freedom's bands. The whirlwind's wrath, the earthquake's shock, have left untouched her hoary rock, the keystone of a land which still, though fallen, looks proudly on that hill, the landmark to the double tide that purpling rolls on either side, as if their waters chafed to meet, yet pause and crouch beneath her feet. But could the blood before her shed, since first Timoleon's brother bled, or baffled Persia's despot fled, arise from out the earth which drank the stream of slaughter as it sank, that sanguine ocean would overflow her isthmus idly spread below? Or could the bones of all the slain who perished there be piled again, that rival pyramid would rise more mountain-like through those clear skies than yon tower-capped Acropolis, which seems the very clouds to kiss? Stanza 2. On dun Citharon's ridge appears the gleam of twice 10,000 spears, and downward to the Isthmian plain, from shore to shore of either main, the tent is pitched, the crescent shines along the Moslems' leaguering lines, and the dusk Spahi's bands advance beneath each bearded Pasha's glance, and far and wide as eye can reach, the turbaned cohorts throng the beach, and there the Arab's camel kneels, and there his steed the Tartar wheels. The Turcoman hath left his herd, the sabre round his loins to gird, and there the volleying thunders pour, till waves grow smoother to the roar. The trench is dug, the cannon's breath wings the far hissing globe of death, fast whirl the fragments from the wall, which crumbles with the ponderous ball, and from that wall the foe replies, over dusty plain and smoky skies, with fires that answer fast and well the summons of the infidel. Stanza 3. But near and nearest to the wall of those who wish and work its fall, with deeper skill in war's black art than Ottoman's sons, and high of heart as any chief that ever stood triumphant in the fields of blood, from post to post and deed to deed, fast spurring on his reeking steed, where sallying ranks the trench assail, and make the foremost Moslem quail, or where the battery guarded well remains as yet impregnable, alighting cheerly to inspire the soldier slackening in his fire, the first and freshest of the host, which Stamboul's sultan there can boast, to guide the follower over the field, to point the tube, the lance to wield, or whirl around the bickering blade, was Alp, the Adrian renegade. Stanza 4. From Venice, once a race of worth, his gentle sires, he drew his birth, but late an exile from her shore, against his countrymen he bore the arms they taught to bear, and now the turban girt his shaven brow. Through many a change had Corinth passed, with Greece to Venice rule at last, and here before her walls, with those to Greece and Venice equal foes, he stood a foe, with all the zeal which young and fiery converts feel, within whose heated bosom throngs the memory of 1,000 wrongs. To him had Venice ceased to be her ancient civic boast, the free, and in the palace of St. Mark unnamed accusers in the dark within the lion's mouth had placed a charge against him uneffaced. He fled in time and saved his life, to waste his future years in strife that taught his land how great her loss in him who triumphed over the cross, 'gainst which he reared the crescent high and battled to avenge or die. Stanza 5. Kumorgi, he whose closing scene adorned the triumph of Eugene, when on Karlowitz's bloody plain, the last and mightiest of the slain, he sank, regretting not to die, but cursed the Christians' victory. Kumorgi, can his glory cease, that latest conqueror of Greece, till Christian hands to Greece restore the freedom Venice gave of yore? 100 years have rolled away since he refixed the Moslem's sway, and now he led the Mussulman, and gave the guidance of the van to Alp, who well repaid the trust by cities levelled with the dust, and proved by many a deed of death how firm his heart in novel faith. Stanza 6. The walls grew weak, and fast and hot against them poured the ceaseless shot, with unabating fury sent from battery to battlement, and thunder-like the pealing din rose from each heated culverin, and here and there some crackling dome was fired before the exploding bomb. And as the fabric sank beneath the shattering shell's volcanic breath, in red and wreathing columns flashed the flame, as loud the ruin crashed, or into countless meteors driven, its earth stars melted into heaven, whose clouds that day grew doubly dun, impervious to the hidden sun, with volumed smoke that slowly grew to one wide sky of sulphurous hue. Stanza 7. But not for vengeance long delayed, alone did Alp the renegade the Moslem warriors sternly teach his skill to pierce the promised breach. Within these walls a maid was pent, his hope would win without consent of that inexorable sire, whose heart refused him in its ire, when Alp beneath his Christian name her virgin hand aspired to claim. In happier mood and earlier time, while unimpeached for traitorous crime, gayest in gondola or hall, he glittered through the carnival, and tuned the softest serenade that ever on Adria's waters played at midnight to Italian maid. Stanza 8. And many deemed her heart was won, for sought by numbers, given to none, had young Francesca's hand remained still by the church's bonds unchained. And when the Adriatic bore Lanciotto to the Paynim shore, her wonted smiles were seen to fail, and pensive waxed the maid and pale, more constant at confessional, more rare at masque and festival, or seen at such with downcast eyes, which conquered hearts they ceased to prize. With listless look she seems to gaze, with humbler care her form arrays, her voice less lively in the song, her step, though light, less fleet among the pairs, on whom the morning's glance breaks yet unsated with the dance. Stanza 9. Sent by the state to guard the land, which wrested from the Moslem's hand, while Sobieski tamed his pride by Buddha's wall, and Danube's side. The chiefs of Venice rung away from Patra to Euboea's bay. Minotti held in Corinth's towers the Doge's delegated powers, while yet the pitying eye of peace smiled over her long forgotten Greece. And ere that faithless truce was broke, which freed her from the unchristian yoke, with him his gentle daughter came, nor there, since Menelaus's dame forsook her lord and land, to prove what woes await on lawless love, had fairer form adorned the shore than she the matchless stranger bore. Stanza 10. The wall is rent, the ruins yawn, and with tomorrow's earliest dawn over the disjointed mass shall vault the foremost of the fierce assault. The bands are ranked, the chosen van of Tartar and of Mussulman, the full of hope, misnamed forlorn, who hold the thought of death in scorn, and win their way with falchions' force, or pave the path with many a course, over which the following brave may rise, their stepping stone, the last who dies. Stanza 11. 'Tis midnight. On the mountains brown the cold round moon shines deeply down. Blue roll the waters, blue the sky spreads like an ocean hung on high, bespangled with those isles of light, so wildly, spiritually bright. Whoever gazed upon them shining, and turned to earth without repining, nor wished for wings to flee away and mix with their eternal ray. The waves on either shore lay there, calm, clear, and azure as the air, and scarce their foam the pebbles shook, but murmured meekly as the brook. The winds were pillowed on the waves, the banners drooped along their staves, and as they fell around them furling, above them shone the crescent curling, and that deep silence was unbroke, save where the watch his signal spoke, save where the steed neighed oft and shrill, and echo answered from the hill, and the wide hum of that wild host rustled like leaves from coast to coast, as rose the muezzin's voice in air, in midnight call to wonted prayer. It rose, that chaunted mournful strain, like some lone spirit's over the plain. 'Twas musical, but sadly sweet, such as when winds and harp strings meet, and take a long unmeasured tone, to mortal minstrelsy unknown. It seemed to those within the wall a cry prophetic of their fall. It struck even the besieger's ear with something ominous and drear, an undefined and sudden thrill, which makes the heart a moment still, then beat with quicker pulse, ashamed of that strange sense its silence framed, such as a sudden passing bell wakes, though but for a stranger's knell. End of the Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron, stanzas 1 to 11. Recorded by Antipodean Writer at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron, stanzas 12 to 22. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Antipodean Writer at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron, stanzas 12 to 22. Stanza 12. The tent of Alp was on the shore, the sound was hushed, the prayer was o'er, the watch was set, the night round made, all mandates issued and obeyed. 'Tis but another anxious night, his pains the morrow may requite, with all revenge and love can pay in guerdon for their long delay. Few hours remain, for he hath need of rest to nerve for many a deed of slaughter. But within his soul the thoughts like troubled waters roll. He stood alone among the host, not his the loud fanatic boast to plant the crescent o'er the cross, or risk a life with little loss, secure in paradise to be, by houris loved immortally. Nor his, what burning patriots feel, the stern exaltedness of zeal profuse of blood, untired in toil, when battling on the parent soil. He stood alone, a renegade, against the country he betrayed. He stood alone amidst his band, without a trusted heart or hand. They followed him, for he was brave, and great the spoil he got and gave. They crouched to him, for he had skill to warp and wield the vulgar will. But still his Christian origin with them was little less than sin. They envied even the faithless fame he earned beneath a Moslem name, since he, their mightiest chief, had been in youth a bitter Nazarene. They did not know how pride can stoop, when baffled feelings withering droop. They did not know how hate can burn in hearts once changed from soft to stern. Nor all the false and fatal zeal the convert of revenge can feel. He ruled them. Man may rule the worst, by ever daring to be first. So lions over the jackal sway. The jackal points, he fells the prey, then on the vulgar yelling press, to gorge the relics of success. Stanza 13. His head grows fevered, and his pulse the quick successive throbs convulse. In vain from side to side he throws his form in courtship of repose, or if he dozed, a sound, a start, awoke him with a sunken heart. The turban on his hot brow pressed, the mail weighed lead-like on his breast, though oft and long beneath its weight upon his eyes had slumber sate, without or couch or canopy, except a rougher field and sky, than now might yield a warrior's bed, than now along the heaven was spread. He could not rest, he could not stay within his tent to wait for day, but walked him forth along the sand, where thousand sleepers strewed the strand. What pillowed them? And why should he more wakeful than the humblest be? Since more their peril, worse their toil, and yet they fearless dream of spoil, while he alone, where thousands passed a night of sleep, perchance their last, in sickly vigil wandered on, and envied all he gazed upon. Stanza 14. He felt his soul become more light beneath the freshness of the night. Cool was the silent sky, though calm, and bathed his brow with airy balm. Behind the camp before him lay, in many a winding creek and bay, Lepanto's gulf, and on the brow of Delphi's hill unshaken snow, high and eternal, such as shone through thousand summers brightly gone. Along the gulf, the mount, the clime, it will not melt like man to time. Tyrant and slave are swept away, less formed to wear before the ray, but that white veil, the lightest, frailest, which on the mighty mount thou hailest, while tower and tree are torn and rent, shines over its craggy battlement. In form a peak, in height a cloud, in texture like a hovering shroud. Thus high by parting freedom spread, as from her fond abode she fled, and lingered on the spot where long her prophet spirit spake in song. Oh, still her step at moments falters over withered fields and ruined altars, and fain would wake in souls too broken, by pointing to each glorious token, but vain her voice, till better days dawn in those yet remembered rays, which shone upon the Persian flying, and saw the Spartan smile in dying. Stanza 15. Not mindless of these mighty times was Alp, despite his flight and crimes, and through this night, as on he wandered, and over the past and present pondered, and thought upon the glorious dead, who there in better cause had bled, he felt how faint and feebly dim the fame that could accrue to him, who cheered the band and waved the sword, a traitor in a turbaned horde, and led them to the lawless siege, whose best success were sacrilege. Not so had those his fancy numbered, the chiefs whose dust around him slumbered, their phalanx marshalled on the plain, whose bulwarks were not then in vain. They fell devoted, but undying, their very gale the names seemed sighing, the waters murmured of their name, the woods were peopled with their fame, the silent pillar lone and grey claimed kindred with their sacred clay. Their spirits wrapped the dusky mountain, their memory sparkled over the fountain, the meanest rill, the mightiest river, rolled mingling with their fame for ever. Despite of every yoke she bears, that land is glory's still and theirs. 'Tis still a watchword to the earth, when man would do a deed of worth, he points to Greece, and turns to tread so sanctioned on the tyrant's head. He looks to her, and rushes on, where life is lost or freedom won. Stanza 16. Still by the shore Alp mutely mused, and wooed the freshness night diffused. There shrinks no ebb in that tideless sea, which changeless rolls eternally, so that wildest of waves, in their angriest mood, scarce break on the bounds of the land for a rood, and the powerless moon beholds them flow, heedless if she come or go, calm or high, in main or bay, on their course she hath no sway. The rock unworn its base doth bear, and looks over the surf, but it comes not there, and the fringe of the foam may be seen below, on the line that it left long ages ago. A smooth short space of yellow sand between it and the greener land. He wandered on along the beach, till within the range of a carbine's reach of the leaguered wall, but they saw him not, or how could he 'scape from the hostile shot? Did traitors lurk in the Christians' hold, where their hands grown stiff, or their hearts waxed cold? I know not, in sooth, but from yonder wall there flashed no fire, and there hissed no ball, though he stood beneath the bastion's frown that flanked the seaward gate of the town, though he heard the sound, and could almost tell the sullen words of the sentinel, as his measured step on the stone below clanked as he paced it to and fro, and he saw the lean dogs beneath the wall hold over the dead their carnival, gorging and growling over carcass and limb. They were too busy to bark at him. From a Tartar's skull they had stripped the flesh, as you peel the fig when its fruit is fresh, and their white tusks crunched over the whiter skull, as it slipped through their jaws when their edge grew dull, as they lazily mumbled the bones of the dead, when they scarce could rise from the spot where they fed. So well had they broken a lingering fast with those who had fallen for that night's repast. And Alp knew by the turbans that rolled on the sand The foremost of these were the best of his band, crimson and green were the shawls of their wear, and each scalp had a single long tuft of hair, all the rest was shaven and bare. The scalps were in the wild dog's maw, the hair was tangled round his jaw, but close by the shore, on the edge of the gulf, there sat a vulture flapping a wolf, who had stolen from the hills, but kept away, scared by the dogs from the human prey. But he seized on his share of a steed that lay, picked by the birds on the bands of the bay. Stanza 17. Alp turned him from the sickening sight, never had shaken his nerves in fight, but he better could brook to behold the dying, deep in the tide of their warm blood lying, scorched with the death thirst and writhing in vain, than the perishing dead who are past all pain. There is something of pride in the perilous hour, whatever be the shape in which death may lower. For fame is there to say who bleeds, and honour's eye on daring deeds. But when all is past, it is humbling to tread over the weltering field of the tombless dead, and see worms of the earth and fowls of the air, beasts of the forest, all gathering there, all regarding man as their prey, all rejoicing in his decay. Stanza 18. There is a temple in ruin stands, fashioned by long forgotten hands, 2 or 3 columns and many a stone, marble and granite with grass overgrown. Out upon time it will leave no more of the things to come than the things before. Out upon time, who forever will leave but enough of the past for the future to grieve. Over that which hath been, and over that which must be, what we have seen our sons shall see, remnants of things that have passed away, fragments of stone reared by creatures of clay. Stanza 19. He sate him down at a pillar's base, and passed his hand athwart his face, like one in dreary musing mood. Declining was his attitude, his head was drooping on his breast, fevered, throbbing, and oppressed, and over his brow, so downward bent, oft his beating fingers went, hurriedly as you may see your own run over the ivory key, ere the measured tone is taken by the chords you would awaken. There he sate all heavily, as he heard the night wind sigh. Was it the wind through some hollow stone sent that soft and tender moan? He lifted his head, and he looked on the sea, but it was unrippled as glass may be. He looked on the long grass, it waved not a blade. How was that gentle sound conveyed? He looked to the banners, each flag lay still, so did the leaves on Cithæron's hill, and he felt not a breath come over his cheek. What did that sudden sound bespeak? He turned to the left, is he sure of sight? There sate a lady, youthful and bright. Stanza 20. He started up with more of fear than if an armed foe were near. God of my fathers, what is here? Who art thou, and wherefore sent so near a hostile armament? His trembling hands refused to sign the cross he deemed no more divine. He had resumed it in that hour, but conscience wrung away the power. He gazed, he saw, he knew the face of beauty and the form of grace. It was Francesca by his side, the maid who might have been his bride. The rose was yet upon her cheek, but mellowed with a tenderer streak. Where was the play of her soft lips fled? Gone was the smile that enlivened their red. The ocean's calm within their view beside her eye had less of blue. But like that cold wave it stood still, and its glance, though clear, was chill. Around her form a thin robe twining, nought concealed her bosom shining. Through the parting of her hair, floating darkly downward there, her rounded arm showed white and bare. And ere yet she made reply, once she raised her hand on high. It was so wan and transparent of hue, you might have seen the moon shine through. Stanza 21. I come from my rest to him I love best, that I may be happy and he may be blessed. I have passed the guards, the gate, the wall, sought thee in safety through foes and all. 'Tis said the lion will turn and flee from a maid in the pride of her purity, and the power on high that can shield the good thus from the tyrant of the wood hath extended its mercy to guard me as well from the hands of the leaguering infidel. I come, and if I come in vain, never, oh never, we meet again. Thou hast done a fearful deed in falling away from thy father's creed. But dash that turban to earth and sign the sign of the cross, and forever be mine. Wring the black drop from thy heart, and tomorrow unites us no more to part. And where should our bridal couch be spread? In the midst of the dying and the dead. For tomorrow we give to the slaughter and flame the sons and the shrines of the Christian name. None save thou and thine, I've sworn, shall be left upon the morn. But thee will I bear to a lovely spot, where our hands shall be joined and our sorrow forgot. There thou yet shalt be my bride, when once again I've quelled the pride of Venice, and her hated race have felt the arm they would debase. Scourge with a whip of scorpions those whom vice and envy made my foes. Upon his hand she laid her own. Light was the touch, but it thrilled to the bone, and shot a chillness to his heart, which fixed him beyond the power to start. Though slight was that grasp, so mortal cold, he could not loose him from its hold. But never did clasp of one so dear strike on the pulse with such feeling of fear, as those thin fingers, long and white, froze through his blood by their touch that night. The feverish glow of his brow was gone, and his heart sank so still that it felt like stone, as he looked on the face and beheld its hue, so deeply changed from what he knew. Fair but faint, without the ray of mind that made each feature play, like sparkling waves on a sunny day. And her motionless lips lay still as death, and her words came forth without her breath, and there rose not a heave over her bosom's swell, and there seemed not a pulse in her veins to dwell. Though her eye shone out, yet the lids were fixed, and the glance that it gave was wild and unmixed with aught of change, as the eyes may seem of the restless who walk in a troubled dream. Like the figures on arms that gloomily glare, stirred by the breath of the wintry air, so seen by the dying lamp's fitful light, lifeless but lifelike, and awful to sight, as they seem through the dimness about to come down from the shadowy wall where their images frown, fearfully flitting to and fro as the gusts on the tapestry come and go. If not for love of me be given thus much, then for the love of heaven again I say, that turban tear from off thy faithless brow, and swear thine injured country's sons to spare, or thou art lost, and never shalt see not earth that's past, but heaven or me. If this thou dost accord, albeit A heavy doom 'tis thine to meet. That doom shall half absolve thy sin, And mercy's gate may receive thee within. But pause one moment more, and take The curse of him thou didst forsake, And look once more to heaven, and see Its love for ever shut from thee. There is a light cloud by the moon, 'Tis passing, and will pass full soon. If by the time its vapoury sail Hath ceased her shaded orb to veil, Thy heart within thee is not changed, Then God and man are both avenged. Dark will thy doom be, darker still Thine immortality of ill. Alp looked to heaven, and saw on high The sign she spake of in the sky. But his heart was swollen and turned aside By deep interminable pride. This first false passion of his breast Rolled like a torrent o'er the rest. He sue for mercy, he dismayed By wild words of a timid maid. He, wronged by Venice, vow to save Her sons, devoted to the grave? No, though that cloud were thunder's worst, And charged to crush him, let it burst. He looked upon it earnestly, Without an accent of reply. He watched it passing, it is flown. Full on his eye the clear moon shone, And thus he spake: "Whatever my fate, I am no changeling, 'tis too late. The reed in storms may bow and quiver, Then rise again, the tree must shiver. What Venice made me, I must be Her foe in all, save love to thee. But thou art safe, oh, fly with me!" He turned, but she is gone. Nothing is there but the column stone. Hath she sunk in the earth, or melted in air? He saw not, he knew not, but nothing is there. Stanza 22. The night is past, and shines the sun, As if that morn were a jocund one. Lightly and brightly breaks away The morning from her mantle grey, And the noon will look on a sultry day. Hark to the trump and the drum, And the mournful sound of the barbarous horn, And the flap of the banners that flit as they're borne, And the neigh of the steed, and the multitude's hum, And the clash and the shout: "They come! They come!" The horse-tails are plucked from the ground, And the sword from its sheath, And they form, and but wait for the word. Tartar and Spahi and Turcoman, strike your tents and throng to the van. Mount ye, spur ye, scur the plain, That the fugitive may flee in vain. When he breaks from the town, and none escape, Aged or young in the Christian shape, While your fellows on foot in a fiery mass Blood stain the breach through which they pass. The steeds are all bridled, and snort to the rein. Curved is each neck, and flowing each mane. White is the foam of their champ on the bit. The spears are uplifted, the matches are lit. The cannon are pointed and ready to roar, And crush the wall they have crumbled before. Forms in his phalanx each Janizar, Alp at their head, his right arm is bare. So is the blade of his scimitar. The Khan and the Pachas are all at their post. The Vizier himself at the head of the host. When the culveron's signal is fired, then on! Leave not in Corinth a living one. A priest at her altars, a chief in her halls, A hearth in her mansions, a stone on her walls. God and the Prophet, Allah, who! Up to the skies with that wild halloo. There the breach lies for passage, the ladder to scale, And your hands on your sabres, and how should ye fail? He who first downs with the red cross may crave His heart's dearest wish, let him ask it and have. Thus uttered Comorghi, the dauntless Vizier. The reply was the brandish of sabre and spear, And the shout of fierce thousands in joyous ire: "Silence! Hark to the signal! Fire!" End of the Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron. Stanzas 12 to 22. Recorded by Antipodean Writer at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron. Stanzas 23 to 33. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Antipodean Writer at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com. The Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron. Stanzas 23 to 33. Stanza 23. As the wolves that headlong go on the stately buffalo, though with fiery eyes and angry roar, and hoofs that stamp and horns that gore, he tramples on earth or tosses on high the foremost who rush on his strength but to die. Thus against the wall they went, thus the first were backward bent. Many a bosom sheathed in brass strewed the earth like broken glass, shivered by the shot that tore the ground whereon they moved no more. Even as they fell in files they lay, like the mower's grass at the close of day, when his work is done on the levelled plain. Such was the fall of the foremost slain. Stanza 24. As the spring tides with heavy plash from the cliffs invading dash, huge fragments sapped by the ceaseless flow, till white and thundering down they go, like the avalanche's snow on the Alpine vales below. Thus at length outbreathed and worn, Corinth's sons were downward borne by the long and oft renewed charge of the Moslem multitude. In firmness they stood, and in masses they fell, heaped by the host of the infidel. Hand to hand and foot to foot, nothing there save death was mute. Stroke and thrust and flash and cry for quarter or for victory mingle there with the volleying thunder, which makes the distant cities wonder how the sounding battle goes, if with them or for their foes, if they must mourn or may rejoice in that annihilating voice which pierces the deep hills through and through with an echo dread and new. You might have heard it on that day over Salamis and Megara. We have heard the hearers say, even unto Piraeus Bay. Stanza 25. From the point of encountering blades to the hilt, sabres and swords with blood were gilt. But the rampart is won, and the spoil begun, and all but the after carnage done. Shriller shrieks now mingling come from within the plundered dome. Hark to the haste of flying feet that splash in the blood of the slippery street. But here and there, where vantage ground against the foe may still be found, desperate groups of 12 or 10 make a pause and turn again, with banded backs against the wall, fiercely stand or fighting fall. There stood an old man, his hairs were white, but his veteran arm was full of might. So gallantly bore he the brunt of the fray, the dead before him on that day in a semicircle lay. Still he combated, unwounded, though retreating, unsurrounded. Many a scar of former fight lurked beneath his corslet bright, but of every wound his body bore, each and all had been taken before. Though aged he was, so iron of limb, few of our youth could cope with him. And the foes whom he singly kept at bay outnumbered his thin hairs of silver grey. From right to left his sabre swept, many an Ottoman mother wept, sons that were unborn when dipped his weapon first in Moslem gore. Each his years could count a score, of all he might have been the sire, who fell that day beneath his ire. For sonless left, long years ago, his wrath made many a childless foe. And since the day when in the strait his only boy had met his fate, his parents' iron hand did doom more than a human hecatomb. if shades by carnage be appeased. Patroclus' spirit less was pleased than his, Minotti's son who died where Asia's bounds and ours divide. Buried he lay, where thousands before for thousands of years were inhumed on the shore. What of them is left to tell? Where they lie and how they fell? Not a stone on their turf, nor a bone in their graves, but they live in the verse that immortally saves. Stanza 26. Hark to the Allah shout! A band of the Mussulman bravest and best is at hand. Their leader's nervous arm is bare, swifter to smite and never to spare. Unclothed to the shoulder it waves them on, thus in the fight is he ever known. Others a gaudier garb may show, to tempt the spoil of the greedy foe. Many a hand's on a richer hilt, but none on a steel more ruddily gilt. Many a loftier turban may wear, Alp is but known by the white arm bare. Look through the thick of the fight, 'tis there. There is not a standard on that shore so well advanced the ranks before. There is not a banner in Moslem war will lure the Delhis half so far. It glances like a falling star wherever that mighty arm is seen. The bravest be or late have been. There the craven cries for quarter vainly to the vengeful Tartar, or the hero silent lying scorns to yield a groan in dying, mustering his last feeble blow 'gainst the nearest levelled foe. Though faint beneath the mutual wound, grappling on the gory ground. Stanza 27. Still the old man stood erect, and Alp's career a moment checked. Yield thee, Minotti, quarter take, for thine own, thy daughter's sake. Never, renegado, never, though the life of thy gift would last for ever. Fransesca, O my promised bride, must she too perish by thy pride? She is safe. Where? In heaven, from whence thy traitor soul is driven, far from thee and undefiled. Grimly then Minotti smiled, as he saw Alp staggering bow before his words as with a blow. O God, when died she? Yesternight. Nor weep I for her spirit's flight. None of my pure race shall be slaves to Mahomet and thee. Come on! That challenge is in vain. Alp's already with the slain. While Minotti's words were wreaking more revenge in bitter speaking than his falchion's point had found, had the time allowed to wound from within the neighbouring porch of a long defended church, where the last and desperate few would the failing fight renew. The sharp shot dashed Alp to the ground, ere an eye could view the wound that crashed through the brain of the infidel. Round he spun and down he fell, a flash like fire within his eyes blazed as he bent no more to rise, and then eternal darkness sunk through all the palpitating trunk. Naught of life left, save a quivering where his limbs were slightly shivering. They turned him on his back, his breast and brow were stained with gore and dust, and through his lips the lifeblood oozed from its deep veins lately loosed. But in his pulse there was no throb, nor on his lips one dying sob. Sigh nor word nor struggling breath heralded his way to death. Ere his very thought could pray, unannealed he passed away, without a hope from mercy's aid, to the last a renegade. Stanza 28. Fearfully the yell arose of his followers and his foes, these in joy, in fury those. Then again in conflict mixing, clashing swords and spears transfixing, interchanged the blow and thrust, hurling warriors in the dust. Street by street and foot by foot Still Minotti dares dispute the latest portion of the land left beneath his high command, with him aiding heart and hand the remnant of his gallant band. Still the church is tenable, whence issued late the fated ball that half avenged the city's fall, when Alp her fierce assailant fell. Thither bending sternly back, they leave before a bloody track, and with their faces to the foe, dealing wounds with every blow. The chief and his retreating train join to those within the fane, there they yet may breathe a while, sheltered by the massy pile. Stanza 29. Brief breathing time, the turbaned host, with added ranks and raging boast, press onwards with such strength and heat, their numbers balk their own retreat. For narrow the way that led to the spot where still the Christians yielded not, and the foremost, if fearful, may vainly try through the massy column to turn and fly. They perforce must do or die. They die, but ere their eyes could close, avengers over their bodies rose. Fresh and furious fast they fill the ranks unthinned, though slaughtered still, and faint the weary Christians wax before the still renewed attacks. And now the Ottomans gain the gate, still resists its iron weight, and still, all deadly aimed and hot, from every crevice comes the shot, from every shattered window pour the volleys of the sulphurous shower. But the portal wavering grows and weak, the iron yields, the hinges creak, it bends, it falls, and all is o'er. Lost Corinth may resist no more. Stanza 30. Darkly, sternly, and all alone, Minotti stood over the altar stone. Madonna's face upon him shone, painted in heavenly hues above, with eyes of light and looks of love, and placed upon that holy shrine to fix our thoughts on things divine. When pictured there, we kneeling see her and the boy god on her knee, smiling sweetly on each prayer to heaven, as if to waft it there. Still she smiled, even now she smiles, though slaughter streams along her aisles. Minotti lifted his aged eye, and made the sign of a cross with a sigh, then seized a torch which blazed thereby, and still he stood, while with steel and flame inward and onward the Mussulman came. Stanza 31. The vaults beneath the mosaic stone contained the dead of ages gone. Their names were on the graven floor, but now illegible with gore. The carved crests and curious hues the varied marble's veins diffuse were smeared and slippery, stained and strown with broken swords and helms overthrown. There were dead above, and the dead below lay cold in many a coffined row. You might see them piled in sable state by a pale light through a gloomy grate. But war had entered their dark caves, and stored along the vaulted graves her sulphurous treasures, thickly spread in masses by the fleshless dead. Here throughout the siege had been the Christians' chiefest magazine. To these a late formed train now led Minotti's last and stern resource against the foe's overwhelming force. Stanza 32. The foe came on, and few remain to strive, and those must strive in vain, for lack of further lives to slake. The thirst of vengeance now awake, with barbarous blows they gash the dead, and lop the already lifeless head, and fell the statues from their niche, and spoil the shrines of offerings rich, and from each other's rude hands wrest the silver vessels saints had blessed. To the high altar on they go, oh but it made a glorious show! On its table still behold the cup of consecrated gold, massy and deep, a glittering prize, Brightly it sparkles to plunderers' eyes. That morn it held the holy wine, converted by Christ to his blood so divine, which his worshippers drank at the break of day, to shrive their souls ere they joined in the fray. Still a few drops within it lay, and round the sacred table glow 12 lofty lamps in splendid row, from the purest metal cast, a spoil the richest and the last. Stanza 33. So near they came, the nearest stretched to grasp the spoil he almost reached, when old Minotti's hand touched with the torch the train. 'Tis fired! Spire vaults the shrine, the spoil, the slain, the turbaned victors, the Christian band, all that of living or dead remain, hurled on high with the shivered fane, in one wild roar expired. The shattered town, the walls thrown down, the waves a moment backward bent, the hills that shake, although unrent, as if an earthquake passed. The thousand shapeless things, all driven in cloud and flame athwart the heaven by that tremendous blast, proclaimed the desperate conflict, or on that too long afflicted shore, up to the sky like rockets go all that mingled there below. Many a tall and goodly man, scorched and shriveled to a span, when he fell to earth again, like a cinder strewed the plain. Down the ashes shower like rain, some fell in the gulf, which received the sprinkles with 1,000 circling wrinkles. Some fell on the shore, but far away, scattered over the isthmus lay. Christian or Moslem, which be they? Let their mothers see and say, when in cradled rest they lay, and each nursing mother smiled on the sweet sleep of her child. Little deemed she such a day would rend those tender limbs away. Not the matrons that them bore could discern their offspring more. That one moment left no trace more of human form or face, save a scattered scalp or bone, and down came blazing rafters strown around, and many a falling stone, deeply dinted in the clay, all blackened there and reeking lay. All the living things that heard that deadly earth shock disappeared. The wild birds flew, the wild dogs fled, and howling left the unburied dead. The camels from their keepers broke, the distant steer forsook the yoke. The nearer steed plunged over the plain, and burst his girth and tore his rein. The bullfrog's note from out the marsh, deep-mouthed arose and doubly harsh. The wolves yelled on the caverned hill, where echo rolled in thunder still. The jackal's troop in gathered cry bayed from afar complainingly, with a mixed and mournful sound, like crying babe and beaten hound. With sudden wing and ruffled breast, the eagle left his rocky nest, and mounted nearer to the sun. The clouds beneath him seemed so dun, their smoke assailed his startled beak, and made him higher soar and shriek. Thus was Corinth lost and won. End of the Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron, stanzas 23 to 33. End of the Siege of Corinth by Lord Byron. Recorded by Antipodean Writer at antipodeanwriter.wordpress.com.